What's going on, everybody? The Airy Lord is here, and welcome back to another Walking Dead off-season vlog between Season 9 and Season 10 of The Walking Dead. This one is going to be covering a topic that I've been looking forward to very much, that I've had on the tip of my tongue, on the top of my mind, ever since, I'd say, the mid-season premiere, episode 10, 11, and we really started jumping into the Whisper story arc. I started noticing some trends, some things, the way the story was being told, and I wanted to discuss those things that I liked. Now, in a lot of the vlogs where I reviewed the most upcoming episode, you guys probably heard some of the things that I liked and didn't like about the episode. But there were some overall themes and storytelling techniques that Angela Kang, who took over as showrunner for Season 9 from Scott Gimple, and it was around this time last year that we actually got that news. If you recall, the Season 8 finale ended a bit later. It actually ended this upcoming week in April. But because Game of Thrones, the final season, is airing in April and May, The Walking Dead obviously didn't want to conflict with that, so they appropriately adjusted their schedule to the week after the Super Bowl, which is usually when they run, but it was just kind of a little off last year, probably because of the momentous death of Carl and other matters of that nature. But I knew that I was excited for this, and when I heard that Angela Kang was going to be the showrunner, I didn't know much about her. I knew she had kind of risen in the ranks of The Walking Dead from being a very, very minor-ish, behind-the-scenes camera person in Season 2 to really stepping up. And then she wrote a few episodes. She actually wrote the episode The Lost and the Plunderers, when Simon kills all the junkyard people. And then she was promoted to full-time showrunner because Scott Gimple has... Now you could see now the responsibilities that he has, now managing this third Walking Dead show, Fear the Walking Dead, the general direction of the original show, and then the Rick Grimes movies. So now we can truly see the broad scope and the broad spectrum of things. Back then we really couldn't see that because after Season 8, it felt like a new chapter. After Season 8, I feel like that was really when the show stepped into its uncharted territory because Morgan was crossing over to Fear the Walking Dead. That was the first Walking Dead character that was going to Fear. And then we soon found out that both Maggie and Rick were leaving. So Angela Kang was stepping into the show at a time where I had little faith in the show, I'll be honest, because Season 8 had ended. I knew what was in store from a comic book perspective, but when I heard the news of Andrew Lincoln leaving the show, you guys can just go back in my archive on my YouTube channel. I was absolutely distraught. So many of my videos were just focused on lamenting the loss of pretty much my favorite actor on the show. And I said that he was my go-to guy and that I was in no way going to stick with the show if Andrew Lincoln left. So what changed? Because obviously my stance towards the show, some of the excitement in vlogs that I've shown you guys over these past couple of weeks, you could tell that there was a structure to the things I was doing in terms of predictions, reviews, reactions, a vlog here and there that's off topic but still related to the show. I really ratcheted up the quality and the quantity of the videos I was doing. So was that attributed to something? Well, I'm here to tell you yes. Now, there were some things that Angela Kang did, and goes to the title of the video, How Angela Kang Saved The Walking Dead, because I really think she did. I think most people would agree, and even going to the Facebook comments, because those, if you really want, like, the God's honest truth, nastiest comments of all for The Walking Dead, just go to The Walking Dead's Facebook page and look at the comments for any of the posts they make. I actually did a video, I think it was like a year and a half ago, where I read comments from random people, most of them complaining about the show. People saying, oh, this show hasn't been good since this person died, or I stopped watching 4 seasons ago, but for some reason I'm commenting on a Facebook post for this show because I have nothing better to do. It was entertaining to say the least. But if you look at the comments now, a lot of people I've noticed are saying like, "Oh, the show's gotten a lot better. Angela Kang did a great job. This is, the show feels new and fresh." So, what really changed with the show? And I'd say the scope. And I'm going to try to limit it to a number of things so I can talk about them in a sequential order. But I'd say the scope of the show is maybe the overarching message that I'm going to try to get across here. And I'm going to use 3 seasons as comparison, all right? And I'll use other seasons as supplemental material if need be. So seasons 7, 8, and 9. We're going to compare those because they're the most recent seasons of the show that we have. And I think comparing them gets this point across the best. When we go into season 7, there are a bunch of communities that are being introduced. And to really get a full understanding of just how many communities there were being introduced, I want you guys to take a look at this photo. I have these photos scrolling, but I'm going to put this photo here. This is the season 8 All-Out War 100th episode, whatever you want to call it, the promotional banner. I actually have a poster of this hanging in my bedroom, and I actually took a picture of that in case you guys are wondering what the photo quality. This is actually hanging in my bedroom. I just love the photo. I love Negan and Rick going at each other. You got Shiva. You got so many characters there, but I'm going to right now live look up. And if you can tell me how many of those characters are still in The Walking Dead. So Rick, he's not in The Walking Dead. He's on the movies. He's off. Maggie is MIA, possibly returning. Morgan's on Fear the Walking Dead. Gregory's dead. Carl is dead. Aaron's still alive. Daryl's still alive. Rosita's still alive. Eugene is still alive. Michonne is still alive, but we don't know how long she has in season 10, if she's leaving kind of like Rick or if she's going to die. So that's a question mark. Dwight is on Fear the Walking Dead. Simon is dead. Gabriel and Ezekiel are alive. Tara is dead, most recently. And Jadis is in the Walking Dead movies. So that is just from the poster for All Out War. And you'll notice that not too many of those characters are actually dead. Some of them are missing, but a lot of them are in different places. They're not in the show contributing to the greater story. And when you have a large cast, when you try to do, I'll go back to season 7 as I was starting my point, and then use season 8 as referencing material. With season 7, when you were going into that season, those first 8 episodes, you were introducing the Kingdom, the Sanctuary, and Oceanside. 3 new communities you were introducing in half of a season. Not even a full season, half of a season. Not to mention we're already dealing with Alexandria and the Hilltop. So the problem is the show really becomes like Game of Thrones, where if any of you have watched Game of Thrones, there are characters all across, they call it Westeros, and then the eastern continent is Essos. So you have these 2 giant land masses, and the main characters and supporting characters are spread all throughout the continent. And everything they're doing relates to each other, and it relates to the bigger story. We see in the season 7 finale of Game of Thrones all these characters coming together in King's Landing, and you realize that they've been all over the world and had all these experiences, and now they're talking to each other and doing business together. But similarly, with The Walking Dead, you had somewhat of the same thing. Think about the first half of season 7, as I was just mentioning, each episode and what it dealt with. Episode 1 was the resolution of the Lucille victims, so that was kind of an outlier. That episode really belonged to season 6, and that was why I hated the cliffhanger, because it basically chopped an episode in half. Honestly, I think The Last Day on Earth, episode 15, that should have been an episode 15 thing, and then the finale should have been the day will come when you won't be. That should have been The season 7 premiere should have been the season 6 finale. It just should have. So then you would have gone with a whole episode dedicated to the kingdom, a whole episode dedicated to the sanctuary, but really the sanctuary from the perspective of Dwight and Daryl's captivity. Then you have an entire episode dedicated to Alexandria and Negan plundering the place. Then you have an entire episode dedicated to just the hilltop and Maggie adjusting to rising leadership at the hilltop. Then you have an entire episode dedicated to to Oceanside being founded, and just Oceanside, and Tara and Heath for brief portions. Then you have another episode that's entirely dedicated to the sanctuary, where it's from Carl and Negan's perspective. We actually see the sanctuary from a pulled out perspective, and we really see how life works at the sanctuary. And then season 8 is a combination episode where we have a couple of different moving parts, and we have different storylines that we finally see coming together in some way. Now, if you look at that, and I've referenced this before, Lenny James, who plays Morgan on The Walking Dead, was angry at Scott Gimple because of that structure, because if you think about it, Morgan is in the episode when the kingdom is introduced, but he's not in episode 3, he's not in episode 4, he's not in episode 5, he's not in episode 6, and he's not in episode 7. He goes 5-6 straight episodes not being in the show. And then in episode 8, in the mid-season finale of season 7, he has this brief conversation with Richard and Carol about fighting against the Saviors, but it really never goes anywhere. There's never any substance to what he does in that episode. His return episode is when Rick meets Ezekiel for the first time, and he kind of voices his opinion on whether the group should go to war with the Saviors. And Lenny James confronted Scott Gimple and said, hey, don't do this to me. I'm a great A-list actor, and I don't need to be sidelined because you're trying to develop this huge, broad-scoped story that you can't handle. And that very much is the issue that people had with Season 7, because there were so many moving parts. You couldn't keep it all together. The show didn't have either the budget or the time to deal with all of these communities, because you got to think to yourself, The Walking Dead only has 40 minutes, 44 minutes per episode, whereas Game of Thrones has an hour and maybe sometimes longer. So they have that additional 20 minutes may not seem important, but when you're structuring the script for an episode, that becomes important. Now, you can argue that 6 seasons of Game of Thrones there are only 10 episodes, and The Walking Dead does 16 episodes. So if you do the math, does that equate to the same amount? Maybe, possibly, but it doesn't feel like it. I feel like there's more substance and material in a lot of the Game of Thrones episodes, and a lot of the Game of Thrones episodes aren't bottle episodes, meaning that they don't just deal with one character in one scenario. And this became like a hashtag, a meme of sorts in season 7. Hashtag bottle episode. Hashtag Scott Gimple, bottle episode. And it would mean that the story stagnates at a standstill, a gridlock, because you have to deal with the same story structure for multiple communities. You have to introduce the sanctuary. You have to introduce the Oceanside. You have to introduce the king. 3 communities, as I said, 3 communities in a half of a season. And it's just because every community has multiple characters. Every community has multiple characters. And some of the communities get snubbed. For example, the Oceanside is really only in 2 episodes of season 7. If you think about it, they're in episode 6 and episode 15 when Rick and the group try to rob their guns. So and that was always a complaint of mine, because the Oceanside never got a lot of screen time, and then they had a few moments where they were on screen. You always thought that, okay, maybe they're like the reinforcements that Rick needs to win the war against the Saviors, but they never felt like a potent, applicable, relevant community. They always just felt like these outliers that were just kind of on the outside. And then And then, when you get into the second half of season 7, you add another community, the Junkyard, with Jadis and her group of hippies. So, you have a grand total, by the season 7 finale, you have the Junkyard, Alexandria, Hilltop, the Kingdom, and Oceanside, and the Sanctuary. So you have six communities that you have to tell their story for everybody. You have to tell, and of course you can have characters from some of those communities go over to other communities and interact, but those were always the best episodes of the show if you think about it. One episode that stands out is Something They Need. Episode 15 of season 7. In this episode, Rick finds out about the Oceanside, and the Alexandrians in force go to the Oceanside, set up explosives, corral the Oceanside women, and steal their guns. But at the same time, you have the Hilltop and Maggie really ascending and overtaking Gregory in terms of leadership. And Gregory potentially tries to stab Maggie, and then he can't prove that he can kill a walker, and Maggie really cements her leadership, and then Gregory takes off and goes to the Sanctuary. And then you also have Negan and Sasha's dynamic when she's a prisoner. You have the Rapey Davy scene, and Negan trying to recruit Sasha, and some of her dialogue with Eugene in terms of how is she going to save her friends when she's a captive of Negan. The only community I think that wasn't, well, you had two. You had the Kingdom and the Junkyard. But for 6 communities, in one episode, you were able to incorporate 4 of them. And then at the end of the episode, you go back to Alexandria and you have that brief scene with Dwight when they realize that he's a prisoner, but he also is willing to help them fight against Negan. He's a turncoat. So that episode had a lot jam-packed in it, and it felt like a rewarding, fulfilling episode. It didn't feel like a bottle episode. And there were a couple of those sprinkled throughout season 7, less so in season 8 because those fight scenes would take up a lot of airtime, and people didn't get that as much. So, at the end of the day, the problem with the series is primarily that. Back in season 7, it had way too much story to tell and not enough airtime to tell it in, basically. Now, the second issue, not to go on too long with that other one, but this does relate. The second issue of these two overarching issues that people had with season 7, 8 is the conflict that was keeping season 7 and 8 so bogged down. And it felt like it added to the same element I was talking about earlier, how season 7 and 8 didn't feel like they were moving because you had these bottle episodes, but also because the conflict never changed. From season 6, when Daryl, Abraham, and Sasha bumped into those bikers, and that lead biker got off his bike and said, "Your property now belongs to Negan." From season 6, episode 8, and then into episode 9, that was really the official start of the Savior conflict. We kind of had the unofficial start of the Savior conflict when Daryl met Dwight for the first time, but it really, they weren't named. It was really just kind of like a teaser, and it also introduced Dwight's character. But we had the introduction of the Saviors in that episode, and if you remember, Daryl blows them up with a rocket launcher. Now, the show there were so many saviors, and it felt like the plot was reused so many times. Like, think of how many saviors there really were. There was Little Timmy and the Dick Brigade. Those were the bikers that Daryl blew up. There was the Satellite Outpost, the first group of the Satellite Outpost, because if you remember, the Satellite Outpost dealt with the Hilltop. They were dealing with trade relations with the Hilltop, and then Rick murdered them all, and then Simon became the new trade master of the Hilltop, but Rick went and murdered all of the people at that satellite station. And so, in a way, season 6, episode 12, that assault on the satellite station, it kind of was our first taste of all-out war. But in reality, All Out War was 2 seasons away in season 8. So you're saying to yourself, oh, this action is really, really cool with Rick and his group fighting in the satellite station. Oh, they're wiping out the Saviors. They took all these guns. Carol and Maggie got captured, but they still won in the end. And you had like a mini resolution because Rick won that battle. They had blown up the bikers. They had slaughtered everyone at the satellite station. There were all these mini victories that made them think that they had defeated the Saviors. But it was almost like the Saviors were the zombies. Like, they just kept coming back, and they kept coming back. There were more and more Saviors. There was the bikers, the ones at the satellite station, those women that captured Maggie and Carol. There were those douchebags that Carol shot with the mini Uzi that was hidden up her sleeve. There's Simon's group. There's Gavin's group. There's Regina's group. There's Mara. Remember the woman who's on the walkie-talkie and then the cars drive by in All Out War and they start shooting her? There's her. There's Laura. There's Dwight. There's... Jesus. Who else? There's Wade. Remember the Saviors that were hunting Dwight in that first episode when Dwight was introduced that we never saw them again? There were, like, if anything, the show succeeded in proving to us that there were a billion fucking Saviors out there. Like, way more than the comics. The Saviors were, like, they really were like an empire. They were a city of just people, and they were just multiplying and there were just so many of them. There were so many of them. Oh, there's other Saviors. There's the new group of satellite station Saviors, the one that Alden is from. Yeah, I feel like I feel like there's more. Oh, there's... What other Saviors? There's that nerdy Savior that has Ezekiel captive until Jerry chops him in half. There's freaking Morales. Oh my gosh, Morales. They bring back Morales and say he's a Savior. Like, oh my God, you guys could make a list, a humongous list of all of the named Saviors. All of the named Saviors. It had also a Rot. Oh my gosh, I'm thinking of these Saviors off the top. As I keep talking, I keep remembering Saviors. Of a Rot. You had Rapey Davy. You had Gary, the African American guy who was with Rapey Davy when they beat Aaron. When they beat Aaron up. Geez, what other Saviors were there? I mean, there were just so many. It just felt like there were so many. And for season 6, they killed so many of them that you just started to forget. Like, think about that lead Savior, the biker, who was talking like, if you have to eat shit, best not to nibble. Bite, chew, swallow, repeat. Goes quicker. In a way, that guy was like a mini Negan. He was building us up to Negan, and I actually really enjoyed that character, and they killed him off like in an instant. I was like, well, wait a minute. Like, why would you kill him off so quickly? Like, he's really funny. He has some cool lines of dialogue. Like, I would have loved to have seen a backstory with that guy, how he interacted with Gavin, Simon, Negan. That would have been really, really cool. But so many of these Saviors were just cannon fodder. Like, the redheaded one that had that dynamic with Carol. And then she dies and gets... impaled on the pike before the group rescues them. Like, there were just so many Saviors. So many. That's the point I'm trying to get across. And I'm just going through all the plot points in my head. And I think the audience, with the bottle episodes and with the quantity of Saviors, people were just like, oh my gosh. Like, we love Negan. Negan's swagger and he's a cool dude. But the show is just, it's like infinitely repeating itself. It's like, Rick versus the Saviors. Rick versus the Saviors. Rick versus the Saviors. Rick versus the Saviors. Like, it was literally half of season 6, all of season 7, and all of season 8. So 2.5 seasons worth of the same villain group with villains that were reproduced. Now, again, every villain was unique. Like, Gavin was more diplomatic. Simon was crazy. Negan was pragmatic but also ruthless. I mean, every Savior had their quirk. You had the Dwight storyline, but there was just so much. There was so much, and it wasn't enough. Like, the structure of The Walking Dead, like in a comic book, you can easily cover all of that and just say, oh, it's in next week's issue. It's in next week's issue. It's in next week's issue. But with the show, people, they forget things. They get fatigued. Like, the show just can't keep pace with that type of thing. All right. So those are my two problems that I bring to the table. How the episodes were structured with the bottle episodes and the length of time that the Saviors were adversaries for our group in the end. Okay. Now, Angela Kang, when she got to season 9, this, like, finally the Saviors were no longer a conflict. But, and I've said this before, that the first 5 episodes of season 9 were kind of like an epilogue, because it dealt with the Saviors being immersed in the group after the war. And you had that little side plot with the Ocean side killing off some of the Saviors because they wanted revenge. And some of it, some of it was from the old Savior stuff, but there was enough going on with other plot elements that it made sense. Like, it didn't feel like things were dragging. Like, Rick was constantly making a life. They were trying to build this bridge. They had an objective, build the bridge. Maggie was still angry that Negan wasn't dead. You had other plot points that were kind of out there, so that it wasn't just one overarching plot point, which was kill Negan, defeat the Saviors, all of them burn and die. Like, that was the plot for so long, and I think people just were like, oh my gosh, like, resolution please. What we got in season 9, like, every episode felt fulfilled. Every single episode, there was a start and end, and you're like, okay, I know there's something's gonna happen in the next episode, but at least I got to chew enough of my food. All right, if each episode is a plate of food, like, all right, I chewed it, swallowed it, digested it, kind of full for now. Maybe I'll be hungry in an hour, but I'm good for now. Okay. The old season 7 and 8s would give you like a bowl of soup, and you'd be like, all right, that was cool, but I'm still looking for some more food. And then you got to wait like a week, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to starve by then. So to use the food analogy, the show, the way it's structured going forward, you had more fulfilled episodes. And then the second part, before this video becomes too long, the villains fit The Walking Dead. It was back to being a simplistic villain that people could understand. Alpha and Beta may be the best villains the show has ever had. And I love Negan. Negan's still my favorite character and my favorite adversary. He's the Joker of The Walking Dead if Rick is Batman. But I really think that in terms of fear, and The Walking Dead actually had a poll. The Walking Dead had a poll on Twitter the other day. Who is your favorite villain? And then they made another poll. Who's the scariest villain? And Alpha won the scariest, and Negan won the best, because they're really different types. And I think the show almost was self-aware. And I said that, I was like, you're kind of self-aware, because Alpha is more of a villain. She's, even we know her backstory, and she's still a psychopath. Like she has little bits of love and admiration for her daughter, but even so, she thinks she's weak, and she holds on to this dominant, just savage philosophy that's driving her. It's like a devil is sucking her soul day by day, and she's just this villain that you love to hate. Like, this is a group unlike anything our group has faced. And then also, how many, just ask yourself this, how many communities are in the show right now? Season 9, episode 16. Finale of season 9. Going into season 10, how many communities are there? 2. There are 2 communities. There's Alexandria and there's the Hilltop. Oceanside, I am going to say that they're a wild card, and I'm not going to include them because I don't know if you've noticed, we have not had one Oceanside scene. Now, I'm talking, the setting is Oceanside. We have not had one scene since season 8, when Aaron was like wallowing in the mud trying to get them to fight the Saviors. And then you had that plot where they were killing the Saviors. But other than Rachel, a grown-up Rachel, I didn't even know. I like found out at the very, like, when she was signing it and she wrote Rachel Ward, it hit me. I was like, oh, that's grown up Rachel. But so many people were saying, like, thank you, I wouldn't have known that, because the Oceanside is never dealt with. They're never dealt with. They're just like that, you know, they're like a comet that comes once every 70 years. It's like, oh my gosh, we're going to get an Oceanside episode? Like, holy crap. And I think Angela Kang has kind of realized that they're only necessary when there's bigger plot stuff with the communities. But even so, none of their people suffered any type of loss from the Whisperers. The Whisperers didn't kill anyone from the Oceanside. And I had said that in my prediction. I was like, someone from each community should die. Everyone from all the other communities was piked, but Oceanside still kind of lives on. But in the end, you have two communities. Everyone from the kingdom's gone. Everyone from the kingdom moved into the hilltop. So now you're going to have more and more character introductions. The sanctuary, it fell. The junkyard, all of those people are dead, and Jadis is off with Rick in the helicopter, and you're going to learn that plot line, which was set up in season 8. You're going to learn that in the movies. So the scope. Remember when I said at the beginning of this video, I talked about the scope of the show. The scope is narrow. And that was when The Walking Dead was at its best. Think about it. When it was just the prison versus the governor, the group versus Terminus, Rick versus Shane, it was a narrow scope. It was simple. There was a plot. There was a villain. There were goals. People had emotions. The emotions fit to the story, and it all made sense. And that's what Angela Kang has done. Angela Kang has made this show streamlined and easy enough to understand so that you can go through it and not feel like you're lacking something by the time you get to the end of the episode. That's really what it boils down to. That's ultimately what it boils down to. And she's put characters in situations where they can have interactions with each other. The kingdom has now, all of them have moved to the hilltop. Now you're going to have interactions between all of those characters. There's only two communities left. And that gives us more time with characters that have never freaking talked to each other somehow, like Negan and Carol. That's something big. Negan hasn't spoken to Daryl since the war ended. I mean, there's a lot of interactions that are now possible because everyone's kind of orbiting within each other. And it makes for such better storytelling. It just really, 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 really does. Like, the show, it got to this point where it was just way too big. Way too big. And I think Angela Kang said the best course is really to keep the improvements since defeating the Saviors and how society has blossomed, but you can limit how many characters and limit the scope of the show so that you can give the characters that we care about the time that we desperately need with them. And hence, Maggie and Rick, you might not even realize that they're gone. Has anyone said that this show is worse because Rick and Maggie left? I'm sure some people would say that. But for me, I can kind of understand looking back why they did it. Because having Rick and Maggie in the picture of the Whisperers, that takes time away from all the other characters. Like, think about Daryl and how much Daryl has been given prominence because Rick and Maggie are gone. The scene where Daryl confronts Alpha outside the hilltop. The scene where Daryl is standing on the rock ledge looking at Alpha's a ginormous horde of zombies. Those scenes were occupied by Rick and Maggie in the comics. But Daryl has those, and it feeds into his leadership that he's slowly assuming since being a wandering nomad. And that was a major problem. With Daryl, he was just a man on revenge. He was guilty because he got Glenn killed, and he wanted all of the Saviors and Negan dead. But that was his plot line for multiple episodes. For multiple episodes, that was Daryl's plot line. He was a man that was beaten down, had everything taken from him, and then he was just on a war path wanting to kill everybody, and he showed a little bit of sympathy when he let Dwight live. Now look at him. Now look at Daryl. Daryl's like a new character, and he's one of my favorites because he's been a character. In season 7 and 8, he was sidelined. It's almost as if he wasn't a character. Now he's a character. He really is his own character now. So, I know this video went long, but it needed to be explained really from start to finish with specific examples why the show has evolved the way it has, why I think it did, and why some of the changes, like getting rid of Rick and Maggie, eviscerating some of these communities, like the Junkyard, like the Sanctuary, like the Kingdom, not having Oceanside on screen as much. Look how much time you free up for all of the other characters, the new characters. It doesn't feel like the show is too big for itself. And it felt like the show was too big for itself, and people were just like, I don't know, where am I? I feel like, oh my god, the Saviors have been the villain for 1,000 years, and what community am I? I just don't care about the show anymore. And that was it. People were like, I give up. So many people dropped off the show because they were just like, I can't follow this. It's just like I get it. Negan needs to die, but we're just like, how many episodes is it going to take? Like almost 50 for this guy to die? And I'm not saying the solution was to rush the plot, have All Out War be an all in season 7. What I'm saying is each of the episodes could have been more fulfilled. They could have been like episode 15 of season 7. Remember I gave that example earlier? If more episodes in season 7 and 8 were like that, I think people would have less complaints. They would feel like Game of Thrones episodes where things would be fulfilled. You would feel, remember the food analogy, when you fill up on the episode, you're like, oh, all right, I feel full. I needed to feel more of that in season 7 and 8. And although I like the episodes, like I stuck with the show because I'm always going to stick with the show. But for other people, like, yeah, I could see the problems of always being pissed off. Like, oh my God, I got to wait another week because the plot just keeps dragging. I don't know what's happening in 4 other communities, and it's just, leaving me in limbo. What they did with the show since was a major improvement. And if they keep that up, and it seems like they are, what they did in the season 9 finale by having the Kingdom go bust, they're on the right path. So that's it from me, guys. This is a big video and a big undertaking, but it's probably one of the more important ones I wanted to get to, and I'm really glad I did. So if you guys have similar opinions or comments, let me know, and always subscribe, and I'll see you guys for more Walking Dead content. Peace.